He ruled Seoul's underworld with an iron fist. No one crossed Jang Tae-mok and lived to tell the story. But when he walked back through his front door after more than a year of silence, blood, and war, nothing could have prepared him for what was waiting inside. Not a weapon. Not an enemy. Two tiny boys. His sons. And the woman he left behind, standing there with fire in her eyes and milk on her shirt, looking like she had already survived a war of her own. If you've never seen a Mafia boss break, you're about to. Subscribe and don't you dare leave before the end. The black SUV cut through Seoul's night like a blade. Rain hammered the windshield. Go Min-suk drove in silence, his thick hands steady on the wheel, his jaw tight. In the back seat, Jang Tae-mok sat with his eyes closed and his head tilted back against the leather headrest, but he was not sleeping. He had not slept properly in 14 months. His left hand rested on his thigh, bandaged at the knuckles. His dark suit was immaculate despite everything, despite the negotiations, the confrontations, the 3 men he had personally put into the ground in the final week of the internal war that had nearly torn his organization apart from the inside. It was over now. Every traitor had been identified. Every threat had been neutralized. The syndicate was intact, and Jang Tae-mok had emerged from the fire the same way he always did, standing, breathing, and colder than when he went in. He should have felt something close to relief. Instead, there was only a low, quiet ache in his chest that he could not name. He knew what it was, of course. He had known for months, in the rare moments when the chaos of war gave him enough silence to think. It was her. Amarachukwu Okoye, who laughed too loudly at her own jokes and drew the most extraordinary things with a pencil and sometimes left half-eaten tangerines on the kitchen counter and never apologized for it. Amma, who had looked at him once across a crowded gallery and seen something in him that he was still not entirely sure was real. He had left her without a word. He had made that decision in under a minute, standing in his office at 2 in the morning with Min-suk across the desk from him and a printed list of names in his hand, names of men inside his own organization who wanted him dead. Men who would not hesitate to use every vulnerability available to them. And Amma was the most visible vulnerability he had. He had told himself it was protection. He had told himself she would be angry but safe, and that safe was what mattered. He had told himself all of this for 14 months. The SUV slowed. Tae-mok opened his eyes. "We are here," Min-suk said quietly. The apartment building rose in front of them, glass and steel, its lobby lit gold through the rain. Tae-mok stared at the building for a moment. He thought of Amma inside. He wondered if she had already left, if she had packed her portfolio and her tangerines and gone back to Lagos, gone somewhere far from Seoul and from him and from all of this. The thought produced a tightness in his chest that was almost physical. He got out of the car. The elevator ride up was the longest he could remember. He stood with his hands at his sides and watched the numbers climb and tried to compose himself the way he would before any high-stakes meeting. Controlled breath. Neutral face. Every word considered before it left his mouth. He had a speech prepared. He had been composing it in his head for weeks. He would explain what had happened, as much as he was able to explain. He would acknowledge the damage done. He would ask, not demand, for the chance to repair things. The elevator opened. He walked down the corridor and stopped at the door. He had a key. His hand found it in his jacket pocket. He stood there for a long moment in the quiet of the hallway, and then he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was dim. One lamp was on in the living room, casting a warm, low light. He stepped in and closed the door softly behind him, and that was when he noticed it. He stopped moving. On the floor beside the sofa, there was a play mat. Padded, patterned with cartoon animals in yellow and green. There were small plush toys arranged near one edge, a tiny elephant, a giraffe, something shapeless and blue. On the coffee table, 2 bottles with pale liquid inside, and beside them a tin of formula and a folded white cloth. And there, pushed against the far wall of the living room, a crib. Tae-mok did not move. He stood in the entryway and looked at the crib and felt the floor shift under him in a way that had nothing to do with the physical world. His eyes moved from the crib to the play mat to the bottles, and then back to the crib, and his mind, the same mind that had navigated 14 months of internal warfare, that had read men's intentions like maps, that had not been caught off guard once in the entire duration of the conflict. His mind went completely, utterly still. He heard a sound. Soft, high, a small shuffling from somewhere deeper in the apartment. Then footsteps, unhurried, familiar, and he felt his chest constrict before she even appeared. Amma came through the hallway door carrying a baby. She was wearing a loose cream top and dark trousers, her natural hair pulled back. She looked tired in the deep, particular way of someone who had not slept a full night in months. But she was also, undeniably, entirely herself, spine straight, chin up, eyes that landed on him and did not flinch. She stopped walking. They looked at each other across the dim room. The baby in her arms stirred and made a small sound, a soft, wet exhale, and Tae-mok's eyes dropped to the child involuntarily. He saw a small round face. Tiny closed fist pressed against a cheek. Dark hair. He looked back at Amma. She walked toward him. Slowly, deliberately, watching his face the entire time. She stopped when she was 2 feet from him, and then, without a word, she held the baby out toward him. He did not move for a moment. He was not sure he was breathing. Hold him, Amma said. Her voice was quiet, but there was nothing soft about it. Tae-mok's arms came up. It was almost involuntary. His body moving before his mind had caught up with what was happening. The baby was placed into his arms. He adjusted instinctively, one hand beneath the small warm weight of the child's back, the other cradling the head, and the baby settled against his chest without waking. He looked down at the face. He looked at it for a long time. Then Amma turned and walked to the crib. She reached in and lifted a second child. Tae-mok watched her come back. He watched her stand before him holding the second baby, and he looked at that face too, slightly different, the mouth curved differently even in sleep, one small ear pressed against her forearm, and something in him broke open without any sound at all. You've been gone a long time, Tae-mok, Amma said. Her eyes were steady, but he could see the years of it in them, the waiting, the anger, the sleepless nights, all of it compressed into a look that was more eloquent than any speech he had prepared. Meet your sons. He did not speak. He could not. The child in his arms shifted and made a tiny sound, and Tae-mok looked down, and then, for the first time in longer than he could calculate, his eyes filled with tears. He did not let them fall immediately. He tried, because he was Jang Tae-mok, and he had not cried in front of another person in 15 years. But the child in his arms was so small and so warm and so completely, impossibly real, and the weight of 14 months pressed down on him all at once, and the tears came without his permission, sliding down a face that had been trained never to show weakness, not once, not ever. Amma watched him. She did not comfort him, and she did not mock him. She stood and watched the most feared man in Seoul weep over an infant he had not known existed, and her own eyes were bright, but her jaw was set, because she had earned the right to make him feel this. What are their names? He asked. His voice was wrecked. I named them, she said. I named them alone while you were gone. She paused. The one you're holding is Cairo. The one I have is Soren. He said both names under his breath, as though testing the weight of them. Cairo. Soren. How old, he said. It was barely a question. He already knew it would hurt. For months, Amma said. For months old, Tae-mok. They were born, and they came home, and they grew, and you are not here. He absorbed this. He stood with Cairo against his chest, and looked at Amma holding Soren, and he said nothing, because there was nothing that adequately addressed 4 months. He would have to live inside that debt for a long time. Sit down, Amma said. They'll need to be fed soon. He sat on the sofa and held Cairo while Amma sat in the chair across from him with Soren. The apartment was quiet except for the rain and the small sounds of the babies. Tae-mok did not take his eyes off the child in his arms. Cairo slept with a stillness that felt ancient, one tiny fist loosely open now, his chest rising and falling with slow, even breaths. Minsuk told me at the very beginning, Amma said, after a long silence. That you had left to protect me, that you had ordered him to watch over me from a distance. She was not looking at him. She was looking at Soren. I was furious when I found out. I told him I did not need a shadow. I told him I had not asked for any of this. You needed protection, Tae-mok said quietly. What I needed, Amma said, and now she did look at him, and the directness of her gaze was almost physical, was the man I was in love with to look me in the face and tell me what was happening. That is what I needed. Not a stranger watching me from a parked car. He did not argue with this. She was right, and he knew it. He had made a tactical decision in a moment when tactics were the only language he knew, and what he had failed to account for was that Alma was not a strategic variable. She was a person. A person who had subsequently discovered she was pregnant and alone in a foreign city, who had carried twins through 9 months without him, who had given birth and recovered and learned and built something while he was far away fighting his wars. Were you safe? He asked. During the pregnancy. Were you? Was it difficult? Alma looked at him for a long moment. I threw up every morning for 3 months. I had no family here. My mother called from Lagos every day and begged me to come home, and every day I told her I was staying. She paused. I had Minsuk, eventually. Once I accepted he wasn't going away. He's a good man, Tae-mok said. He is. He drove me to every appointment. He waited in the hospital corridor for 6 hours when the boys arrived. She tilted her head slightly. He cried, actually. At the birth. Big man, terrible crier. Something moved across Tae-mok's face. Gratitude and grief at the same time. I should have been there, he said. Yes, Alma said simply. You should have been. Cairo stirred against his chest. Tae-mok shifted his grip automatically, and the baby settled, and the ease of it surprised him, the way his body seemed to already know what to do, or perhaps was simply following the instinct of every living thing asked to hold something small and fragile. He looked down at the boy's face. He thought about what it would have been to be in that hospital corridor, to hear cry for the first time, to count fingers. He had missed it. He could not get it back. I'm here now, he said. It felt inadequate, and he knew it, but it was also the only truth he had to offer. I know, Alma said. She stood and walked to the kitchen to warm the bottles, and Tae-mok sat in the lamplight holding his son, and for that hour the city outside did not exist. It took 4 days for word to reach the right ears. In the ecosystem of Seoul's underworld, information moved like water, finding every crack, pooling in every low place. And the information that spread in those 4 days was extraordinary by any standard. The cold, remote, famously detached Jang Tae-mok had children. Twin sons. A foreign woman, a Nigerian fashion illustrator, living in his apartment. The Mafia CEO, who had never given anyone a visible weakness, had apparently been carrying one for over a year. Kwon Jae-rin heard it on a Tuesday over a lunch he barely touched. He was lean, sharp-faced, 34 years old, and he had been waiting 2 years for something he could use against Tae-mok. He set down his chopsticks and sat very still for a moment. Then he smiled. Children, he said aloud to no one in particular. Of course. He made 3 calls that afternoon. Tae-mok's mother arrived on a Wednesday. Bae Si-hwa was 58 years old and had the posture of a woman who had never once lowered herself in her life. She wore a charcoal wool coat and no jewelry except a single jade ring on her right hand, and she walked into the apartment as though she owned it because she had decided, decades ago, that every room she walked into was a room she owned. She stopped when she saw Alma. Alma was seated at the kitchen table working on a spread of fashion sketches. One of the twins, Soren, strapped to her chest in a carrier, fast asleep, his round head lolling against her collarbone. She looked up when the older woman entered, and she set down her pencil, but she did not stand. She held the older woman's gaze with the same patience she held everything, complete, unhurried, entirely unintimidated. Si-hwa turned to Tae-mok, who was standing to one side with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had defused explosives before and found this slightly harder. This is her, Si-hwa said. Not a question. Her name is Alma, Tae-mok said. Si-hwa looked at Alma again. A long, thorough assessment that catalogued and categorized and filed. You have children with my son, she said. Yes, Alma said pleasantly. 2. They look like him, unfortunately. A silence. Tae-mok made a sound that was not quite a cough. Seonhwa moved further into the kitchen and pulled out the chair across from Alma and sat down, setting her bag on the table. "Where's the other one?" "Sleeping," Alma said. "His name is Cairo. He sleeps loudly. You'll hear him. And this one, Soren. He's quieter but more dramatic when he wakes up." Seonhwa looked at the baby strapped to Alma's chest. Something moved briefly behind her eyes. Then her gaze shifted to the sketches spread on the table. "What is this work?" "Fashion illustration. I have a collection deadline in 6 weeks." Alma picked up her pencil again. "I'm a little behind, for obvious reasons." Seonhwa regarded her for another moment. Then she looked at Tae-mok with an expression he had seen exactly 3 times in his life, and which meant she was revising a position she had already taken. She said nothing, but she did not leave. Over the following days, Seonhwa moved through the apartment with her customary authority, inspecting the preparation of formula and the changing of sheets and the arrangement of the nursery with an eye that missed nothing. She said very little to Alma directly, but she watched everything, watched the way Alma handled both boys simultaneously without losing her composure, watched the way she spoke to them while she sketched, her pencil moving and her voice low and easy, narrating small observations about the light or the weather or the shape of a sleeve. She watched the way Tae-mok sat on the floor with the boys each evening, Cairo on one knee and Soren on the other, enormous and careful and completely unlike anything Seonhwa had seen from her son before. On the 5th day, she told Alma that her sketches showed real understanding of structure. This was, from base Seonhwa, the rough equivalent of a standing ovation. Alma said, "Thank you," and went back to her work. The threat arrived on a Friday. Min-suk got the intelligence first. He called Tae-mok from his car at 9:30 in the evening, and Tae-mok stepped out onto the balcony to take the call, sliding the glass door shut behind him. "Kwon Jae-rin," Min-suk said. "He's been moving people around for the past week. Specifically around your residential sector. We have eyes on 2 vehicles that have been rotating positions outside the building." Tae-mok stood with one hand on the balcony rail and looked out at the city. Seoul spread below him in its enormous illuminated sprawl, 10 million lives compressed into light and noise, and somewhere in it Kwon Jae-rin was making a calculation. "How serious?" Tae-mok said. "Serious enough that I'm calling you on a Friday night," Min-suk said. "He's heard about the boys. You know what that means. He thinks it makes me manageable. He thinks it makes you stoppable. There's a difference." Min-suk paused. "Tae-mok, the boys need to be moved. Somewhere with no connection to you. Your mother's second property in Busan, or—" "I'll speak to Alma," Tae-mok said. The balcony door slid open and Alma stepped out, a cardigan pulled around her shoulders. She looked at his face and then at the phone in his hand, and she waited. He ended the call and turned to her. He told her clearly and without softening it, the threat, the surveillance, Kwon Jae-rin, what it likely meant. Alma stood with her arms folded and listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "You want to send us away?" "I want you safe," he said. "There's a property in Busan. Min-suk would take you tonight. You'd be completely protected and off any." "No," she said. He looked at her. "No," she said again, and her voice was level and clear and left no room for discussion. "Tae-mok, I did not stay in Seoul through a pregnancy and 4 months of raising twins alone so that the first time something goes wrong I can be packed into a car and shipped off to Busan while you handle it." She met his eyes steadily. "I am not going anywhere." "Alma," he said carefully, "this is not a negotiation. These people. I know what these people are capable of," she said. "I've been living within range of your world for 2 years. I know exactly what the risk looks like." She unfolded her arms. "And I am still saying no. Secure this building. Do whatever you need to do. But I am not running." He looked at her for a long time. He thought about arguing further. He had the arguments ready, the practicalities, the probabilities, the risk assessment. But he was also standing in front of a woman who had spent 14 months building a life in the shadow of his world with no protection other than Min-suk and her own considerable will, and he understood that telling Alma to run was a category error. It would not work. It never had. Then I need you to do exactly what I tell you if something happens, he said. Within reason, she said. Fine. Yes. Within reason and also yes. She paused. Now come inside. Cairo is starting to smell like he needs attention, and I've changed him 4 times today, so that one is yours. He went inside. What happened 9 days later was fast and professionally organized, which told Tae-mok that Jae-rin had spent real money on it. It was a Sunday afternoon. The building's service entrance. 2 men in delivery uniforms who had convincing credentials and a van with legitimate plates that had been cloned from a real logistics company. They got through the ground floor before the building's internal security flagged the weight discrepancy on the service elevator, too heavy for an empty trolley, and sent an alert. Min-suk had 4 men on site. He was notified within 45 seconds. Tae-mok was in the nursery with both boys when his phone buzzed. He read the notification, set Soren carefully against the cushioned back of the crib, and moved into the hallway. Stay in the bedroom with the boys, he told Amma, who had appeared in the hallway already, reading his face. Lock the door. Do not open it until I or Min-suk tells you. Is it? Yes. Go. She went. She took both boys from the nursery and moved to the bedroom and locked the door, and Tae-mok felt a cold, surgical calm settle over him that had nothing to do with indifference and everything to do with focus. The confrontation was over in 8 minutes. Min-suk's men had contained the 2 in the service corridor before they reached the residential floor. 2 more were taken outside by the vehicle. There was a brief, contained violence that left no permanent damage to anyone who did not deserve it, and then it was done. Tae-mok stood in the building's security office afterward and looked at the 4 men and felt a clarity that cut through everything. These men had come for his sons. He had built his organization over 12 years. He had inherited it at 24 from a dying man who had believed in his capacity for ruthlessness, and he had spent the decade since proving that belief correct. He had killed for his organization. He had bled for it. He had sacrificed 14 months of his life to preserve it. And inside it, men had looked at his children, his sons, for months old, and seen tools. He made his calls. Over the following 72 hours, Tae-mok moved through his organization the way a surgeon moves, with precision, without sentiment, cutting everything that was infected. Kwon Jae-rin was dealt with quietly and finally. 8 additional members connected to the plot were removed from their positions and handed to the appropriate authorities with enough evidence to make their legal situation thoroughly permanent. 3 others resigned voluntarily upon understanding the direction of events. He restructured the organization's internal hierarchy from the top tier down, installing people whose loyalty he had tested and whose judgment he trusted. He created a new security protocol for his residential address. He had 3 separate conversations with Min-suk about the building's vulnerabilities and spent 2 hours walking the perimeter with a security consultant. And then he went home. Amma was sitting on the floor with both boys on the play mat when he came in. Soren was on his back, grabbing at a hanging toy with both hands and making noises of profound satisfaction. Cairo was on his stomach, doing something with his arms that appeared to be an early attempt at pushing himself up. Amma was watching them and sketching simultaneously, the notebook balanced on one knee. She looked up when he entered. She searched his face. "It's done," he said. She set down the pencil. "All of it. All of it." She exhaled slowly. The tension she had been carrying without showing it released from her shoulders, and she looked suddenly more tired than she had in days. He sat on the floor beside her. Cairo abandoned his push-up efforts and immediately latched onto Tae-mok's sleeve with a surprising grip strength that Tae-mok was still not entirely accustomed to. He looked down at the boy and something in his chest rearranged itself. "I want to tell you something," he said. Amma looked at him. She waited. "I made decisions for the past 12 years based entirely on what protected the organization. That was the only calculus." He held Cairo's grip gently in his hand. When I left you, I was still using that calculus. I told myself removing myself removed the risk to you. I told myself it was the right call." "It wasn't," Amma said quietly. "No," he said. "It wasn't. Not because the threat wasn't real. but because I was so trained to think in terms of the organization that I couldn't see what I was doing to you, what I was taking from you. He paused. I'm telling you this because I am not going to do that again. Whatever the organization needs from me going forward, I will find a way to do it that does not require me to disappear from your life or from theirs. I don't know how to be a father yet. I am clearly not experienced at it. But I will be here while I learn. Amma was quiet for a moment. Soren, having successfully seized the hanging toy, let out a cry of triumph that was significantly too loud for the room. Neither of them looked away from each other. I nearly left, she said. 3 times. Once in the 5th month, once right after they were born. Once about 6 weeks ago. She looked at his face. I kept staying. I kept telling myself you would come back. That you had a reason. She tilted her head slightly. I was angry at myself for staying. It felt weak. It wasn't weak, he said. No, she agreed. It was stubborn. Which is different. The corner of her mouth moved. I've always been stubborn. He reached out and put his hand over hers. She did not pull away. Sienwa's transformation was not announced. It arrived the way rivers arrive, not suddenly, but arriving nonetheless. She had been present for the events of that Sunday, contained in the bedroom with Amma and the boys for 8 silent minutes that she had borne with a composure that Amma respected without saying so. Afterward, she had said nothing about it, not about the men who had come, not about the resolution. She simply resumed her presence in the apartment with the same authority as before. But something had shifted in the quality of how she looked at the boys. One evening Tae-mok came into the living room and found his mother sitting on the sofa with Cairo in her arms, rocking him without apparent awareness that she was doing it, her hard face entirely soft, murmuring something in Korean that was low and old and that Tae-mok recognized as a song she had sung to him when he was very small. He stood in the doorway and did not go in. Later, he found her standing at the kitchen counter watching Amma feed Soren, the two of them in a conversation about the textile industry in Lagos that appeared to have been going on for some time. Amma was talking and eating a tangerine simultaneously. Sienwa was listening with the specific attention she gave things she found genuinely interesting. On her last evening before returning to her own home, Sienwa found Tae-mok alone in the nursery. He was standing over the crib looking at both boys, who had fallen asleep in the position they often preferred, turned toward each other, as though even in sleep they were in conversation. Sienwa stood beside him and looked at her grandsons. After a long time, she said, she is very capable. I know, Tae-mok said. The boys are healthy. A pause. You look different. He glanced at her. Different how? She considered. Less sealed, she said finally. And she walked out of the nursery, and that was all she said, and it was, from Bae Sienwa, the closest thing to a blessing he was likely to receive. He took it. Seoul moved on around them. The city did not care about internal mafia restructurings any more than it cared about anything else. It had 10 million people and 10 million concerns, and the Jang organization was simply one more current in the enormous river. But within the world of men who paid close attention to such things, the events of those weeks were noted and discussed and understood. A new red was circulating on Jang Tae-mok. He had survived a brutal internal war. He had neutralized a rival's coordinated attempt to exploit a vulnerability. He had restructured his organization with a speed and precision that suggested he had been planning it long before the crisis forced it. And the reason for the restructuring, the reason the vulnerability had existed in the first place, was 2 infants sleeping in a crib on the 32nd floor of a building that now had the most thorough security protocol of any residential address in the city. Men in the organization whispered about it among themselves. Not mockingly. Something else. Something closer to a revised understanding. Their CEO had not become softer. He had become more dangerous. Because the man who had nothing to lose fights with freedom, but the man who has everything to protect fights with something that does not stop. They had seen the 72 hours. They had seen how fast and how completely he had moved. Not for the organization. For 2 boys who could not yet hold their own heads up. Min-suk said nothing to anyone about any of it. But late one night, driving home, he allowed himself a small, private satisfaction that he shared with no one. For months later, if you walked through the 32nd floor apartment on a Tuesday evening, what you would find was this. Tae-mok on the living room floor. Both boys arranged on the play mat before him. Cairo on his back, doing the thing he had recently discovered with his toes that appeared to give him enormous intellectual satisfaction. Soren attempting to pull himself into a sitting position against Tae-mok's knee, failing, making an aggrieved noise, and attempting again. Tae-mok watching them both with the focused attention he had once reserved for intelligence reports, occasionally narrating small observations to each of them in a low voice, occasionally reaching out to steady Soren's wobble. Alma at the kitchen table, the deadline for the collection now met, working on something new. The apartment had acquired, in 4 months, the particular warmth of a place where small people live, color and clutter, and the persistent low-level noise of 2 personalities discovering the world. The cribs had been moved to a proper nursery. The playmat had migrated to the center of the living room because that was where it wanted to be, and no one had the energy to argue. On this Tuesday evening, at some point after 10, both boys were asleep. Tae-mok had not moved. He was sitting with his back against the sofa and both infants on his chest, asleep, warm and entirely relaxed, small faces pressed against his shirt. He was sitting very still the way people sit when they are afraid to disturb something perfect. Alma stood in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at him. He looked up and saw her watching. He did not say anything. He looked back down at the boys and then out at the dark windows and the far lights of the city. "I ruled this city," he said, so quietly it was barely above a thought. "I spent 12 years building something no one could touch. I thought that was what I was working toward." He paused. "I didn't know I was missing anything." Alma crossed the room and sat beside him. She looked at the boys on his chest. Cairo's fist was curled against Tae-mok's collar. Soren's mouth was slightly open. "Now you do," she said. He looked at her. In the low light of the apartment, with the city going on outside and the boys breathing slow and even against his chest, she was the most real thing he had ever seen. "Now I do," he said. The city went on. Seoul breathed and roared and lit itself up against the dark. And in a 32nd floor apartment, the most feared man in it sat perfectly still, holding the only 2 people who had made all of it mean something. If this story found you, it was meant to find you. Share it with someone who needs to believe that even the hardest hearts can crack open. Subscribe to stay with us for the next story. We will be here. And if you made it to this last line, drop a comment below and tell us, what was the moment that got you? Leave a like before you go. It means more than you know.